In the first video in this series, which is linked in the top right above, I discussed how your chain could be costing you energy because of frictional losses, but also it could be costing you money because of unnecessary wear. A well-maintained chain can reduce both of those losses, and in this video I'm going to cover some of the fundamentals that you need to understand in order to be able to maintain your chain effectively. In particular, I'm going to cover the function of the chain and look at its structure. The primary function of the chain is to transfer the energy from your legs through to motive power at the rear wheel, and that is done through converting the rotary force at the crankset through to the cassette, which is connected to the rear wheel. On a derailleur system, the chain has a secondary function, and that's to change the gear ratio, or the ratio of the torque at the crankset to the rear wheel. It does that by moving the chain from one size sprocket to another. Those primary and secondary functions cause both movement and forces in the chain. It's the movement and forces that create friction and wear. I'll delve deeper into those in a future video. The chain does interact with the chain set and the cassette, so if you look after your chain, that helps look after the cassette and the chain rings. Let's go in and take a deeper dive look at the chain. This is a section of a modern 12-speed chain. These are manufactured to very, very tight tolerances. The chain has been designed as a series of hinges, and therefore it flexes quite freely in this plane. That's so that the chain can articulate over the chain set, the cassette and the jockey sprockets without absorbing too much energy. However, if I turn this in that direction and try to flex it laterally, it really doesn't want to bend. That's because the tolerances in the individual components are so tightly controlled that there's very little movement in there, and therefore the chain doesn't want to flex. Now that's quite important in terms of the efficiency and wear in the chain, and I'll talk about that in a future video. In order to illustrate how these chains work, I'm going to look at a 9-speed chain. You'll see that it's actually much thicker. This chain is like practically all chains, and they have the same repeating structure, and it's made up of 4 different components. An outer plate, there's an inner plate underneath the outer plate. If I rotate this round, you'll see a roller, and then passing through the outer, inner plates and roller is a pin. There are outer and inner plates on both sides of the chain. We can look at this in more detail because I've actually removed some of these side plates, and that exposes the inner plate. This also exposes those pins that are sticking out. I can remove the inner plate too, and then you can see what we call rollers. Now I ought to clarify, although these are called rollers, they're not rolling element bearings. They're actually just plain or journal bearings. This is an inner plate with 2 rollers sitting on it. If I remove one of the rollers, you should be able to see on there that that inner plate has a small lip on it. That small lip is what the roller sits on. These rollers, being journal bearings, will have much higher friction and therefore wear than a true rolling element bearing. That makes lubrication of these much more important, and I'll come back to that in a future video. Now the next important thing is that the pin is a press fit into the outer plate, and I rotate it. Both the pin and the link rotate together. Although the outer plate to pin interface transmits a force, because it's a press fit, there's no relative movement, and so there's no frictional loss and no wear at that joint. However, the inner plate does rotate on that pin, so the wear can occur between the holes in the inner plate and that pin, and also on this roller. Not only within the chain, but where that roller bears on the chain wheel and the cassette. We can look at this in a little more detail because this particular link I've filed down. So if we upend that, you can see the structure of the chain. We have the outer plate, the inner plate, there's a pin that goes through each end, and the roller sits on the lip on that inner plate. As this rotates around, the inner plates rotate on that pin. On most modern chains, the side plates are not simply flat pieces of metal. They have various shapes on them. For instance, this one has a chamfer on the edge of this plate. The plates are also not quite flat, and they have various cutouts on them. That's to help the chain change gear, shifting from one sprocket to another. Not only does that help the gear change more quickly and smoothly, but it also reduces some of the internal forces that are applied to the chain when changing gear. In the next video, I'll be talking about those primary and secondary forces that are induced into the chain. Those are the forces that will cause frictional losses and wear of the chain. If you don't want to miss that and subsequent videos, then consider subscribing. Also, giving the video a thumbs up would be very helpful to me and the channel. From me, until that next video, it's goodbye.